Hey everybody, it's PartyElite with another online battle today. I rarely take the Dwarfs to the field, but when I do, it's to settle the grudge against the High Elves of Junin. We begin, of course, with talk of composition and deployment as always, and it's relatively simple from both sides of the field this time around, but there are two dragons on the other end. Let's start with my Dwarfs real quick. As you can see, I've got a Rune Lord in charge to the left over here, and to the right a Thane able to dive into melee wherever he is needed. The Rune Lord will do alright in melee as well, of course, but mainly for that runic support. Up front, I've got 3 units of Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, there to dive in, of course, as the front line with their armor-piercing capabilities, hence the great weapons, and they are checkerboarded with these Thunderers, and these Thunderers can fire in between these gaps right up until the enemy is in their face, and then we can actually spread these Dwarf Warriors with their great weapons out, blocking the enemy's approach and keeping these Thunderers alive and safe, of course, at which point I can send them around or look for different targets. Then on either side, I do have these Longbeards with great weapons, and on the right, an extra unit of these Hammerers able to pull around and try to get a rear charge in. They're pretty slow, but if we can get a rear charge with such a heavy-hitting unit, then it'll devastate the enemy that comes on this right flank. Then, at the back, these Slayers, as well as these Dragonback Slayers protecting my Goblobber. So in good Dawi tradition, taking care of multiple grudges at once, kill some goblins while you're at it. On the other side of the field, as I mentioned, there are 2 dragons. One of them is the Sun Dragon, upon which the Prince is flying. We also have this Moon Dragon, able to provide some assistance from the air. Up front, 3 units of archers, of course, able to pull back when melee is about to start, and then right behind them, the true front line consists of these 3 units of White Lions of Shrace and the Spearmen, who I think were just purchased with some leftover points. The White Lions of Shrace are not a bad call. They are armor-piercing, they're alright in melee, but again, Dwarfs have extremely high melee defense, so you have to use magic to buff melee attack if you're going to go this route. At the back, in terms of magic, we do have this mage able to provide some support, and we also have the White Lions of Shrace over here that I think can either dive in and provide assistance wherever necessary, maybe to these spearmen, or of course pull in for a flanking maneuver of their own. At the back, we have the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower acting as an artillery piece, as you can see, firing away right away, while to the right we have the Silver Helms hoping to creep up and charge into my Dwarfs, artillery or archers, whatever I might have. And you'll see right away the Goblobber is already opening fire, trying to get some damage into these White Lions of Shrace. They are a relatively threatening unit, and in response we have, of course, fire from the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, able to do a fair bit as well. You'll see bounding into these Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, and I decide to just pivot my army a little bit. I'm willing to stick around and open shots off with my artillery at the start here, because I can do a bit more damage, I believe, than that Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, and you'll see it is working. I'm focusing on the White Lions of Shrace, but of course, any shots that miss in such a densely packed formation mean that they'll hit something or the other. So the collateral damage is pretty high. You'll see some of these archers have taken some hurt. These White Lions of Shrace, of course, as the focus of my fire, have taken a bit of hurt, and the enemy is forced to push forward, and I'm able to just stay back there and relax and wait for their approach until I realize, of course, that those archers with their tremendous range of 180 can start firing from a great distance. So you'll see as those White Lions of Shrace creep forward, and my opponent did well enough here to split his army apart in their advance, making sure that, again, there aren't any clumps forming, but of course not being overly cautious, and as a result I'm able to change my target and pick where they are at their densest. But of course, as I was mentioning earlier, these archers are able to fire away from a great distance, and that is ultimately what pushes me into gear. So a couple more shots from the Goblobbers, and as those shots come in and do a decent bit of damage, I mean, the Dwarf Warriors are pretty heavily armored, but of course they can't just stand there taking that pain. I decide to push forward, and at the same time the Goblobber changes targets to these archers over here as they provide this wonderful clump, this massive clump. You'll see getting a great deal of damage in there. When I'm not hitting these trees, I guess hurting the Wood Elves, settle that grudge as well at the same time, I'm hurting some of these archers. So just changing those targets as quickly as possible, and you'll see now my Dwarfs are slowly but surely creeping forward, and I do have to be very wary of that Moon Dragon, of course, threatening units up in the air, but I do have these 3 units of Thunderers able to take care of those guys relatively easily, and again, just continuing fire onto these archers, doing a great deal of damage, both to health and to morale. That's what I love about the Goblobber. The morale damage is tremendous, and at this point, you'll see I pull the Thunderers back. I try to halt them in a position that might bait a charge and get these guys stuck in with these Dwarf Warriors, but unfortunately, that's not the case. The Moon Dragon and the Sun Dragon here both just push on forward, and I'm hoping that these Slayers creeping forward will bait them away, will tuck them away, force them back, but unfortunately they are committed. They're creeping forward as my Thunderers turn around and open shots off at the Moon Dragon over here, and the Moon Dragon opens its fiery breath right in to these Goblobbers, doing a decent bit of damage, but that's definitely not the best target, I would say. You want to target something a bit more densely packed with the Moon Dragon's breath, and in fact, even the Sun Dragon's breath, I would say use it on some of these Slayers perhaps, or on some of these Dwarf Warriors with their great weapons, and just eliminate them off the field. Now the front lines finally do collide as my Thunderers pull back into safety. You'll see these Dwarf Warriors with great weapons dive into the Spearmen here. Those Spearmen are not going to have a good time. Over here as well, we've got these White Lines of Trace pushing in, while to the right as well, these White Lines of Trace pushing in finally, while the Archers continue to provide that range support, and my Goblobber continues to respond, of course, as it has not been taken care of. So the Thunderers, of course, take it upon themselves to fire away at these dragons. You'll see they turn around and open shots, and look at how much damage is being done there to the Prince and his dragon. They're falling apart, but in response we have the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower trying to fire away at the Goblobber, not doing too much, and as that's happening, I've got my Dwarfs performing a flanking maneuver. This is probably the slowest flanking maneuver of all time. You'll see over here on the left, these Longbeards with great weapons coming from the side on these White Lines of Trace, so they're going to start falling apart pretty quickly, and to the right here as well, I've got these Longbeards with great weapons tucking away to the side, but these Hammerers are trying to pull around and get in from the rear. Unfortunately, though, the Prince decides to tuck in and get involved extremely directly, uses Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught, his Stand Your Ground as well, helping his leadership as well as his melee defense as he dives into a pretty heavy hitting unit. One more volley comes in from the Thunderers, doing a touch of damage to the Prince, you'll see, and then soon after, turning my attention to the Moondragon up in the air, well within my range. You'll see the Rune Lord, meanwhile, using the Master Rune of Oath and Steel, trying to help these Spearmen over here, or rather, help defeat these Spearmen over here, as they are not armor-piercing. The plus 60 to armor on these Dwarf Warriors with great weapons is doing a lot of help, and of course it's helping where the enemy is armor-piercing as well. We also have on these White Lines of Trace the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin, just trying to cause some damage and finish that left flank off as quickly as possible, while off in the distance here, you'll see we finally have the Silver Helms getting involved, tucking forward, looking for an opportunity, I think, to shut down these Thunderers, or of course the Goblobber that continues to do a fair amount of damage. Now the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower should have actually been firing away at some of my Thunderers to do damage there instead, because look at how much work they're getting done. The Prince is already very low on health because of those Thunderers, and now the Moondragon is taking a great deal of hurt just with one volley from those 3 units, and that Moondragon is just at about half health. Meanwhile, you'll see over here, in comes a Fiery Convocation. I managed to dodge my Slayers there, tuck them off to the side so they barely take any damage, and the Thunderers, of course, take a touch of damage, but I'm not too concerned. I'd rather they stay steady and fire away as that trickle damage, I would call it, comes through. So not too concerned there. More concerned about these Silver Helms over here, but first the Slayers push in and try to take care of the Prince. Fully surrounded, Apotheosis does go down, trying to cause fear and replenishing hit points, and you'll see over here the Moondragon as well, burning away at my Slayers. Now that's a good use of Dragon's Breath. These Slayers are falling apart, and they're a very threatening unit for the dragons themselves. It's these Slayers and these Dragonback Slayers, in fact, that are keeping the dragons up in the air, so why not take care of them with the Dragon's Breath from a safe distance? Meanwhile, you'll see the Thane did get involved on the right flank over here, and these White Lines of Trace do not stand a chance. They're going to be falling apart. In the center, again, you'll see the Spearmen not having a good time either, but they're doing alright against the Dwarf Warriors, I guess. Not winning decisively or anything here, so keeping them occupied at least. And of course I continue to fire away at the Moondragon, while the Prince now has to pull away from these Hammerers and takes to the air, pretty soon going to be my next target. At this point I notice these Silver Helms are coming in for that flanking maneuver, so my Slayers and my Dragonback Slayers need to be pulled in, while again you'll see the Moondragon now being sent in against the Hammerers. A very dangerous position for these dragons, and at the same time we'll have the Prince's Dragon using its Fiery Breath, this time against the Dragonback Slayers. So again, good use of breath there, trying to eliminate my Slayers so that the dragons can move a bit more freely on the ground, but of course I'm not concerned about this dragon on the ground here or this dragon in the air up here. I need to send these Slayers over to shut down this Silver Helm advance. Meanwhile, you'll see as that left flank of the High Elves has broken apart, my Dwarf Warriors with their great weapons are able to creep forward and now engage some of these archers. These White Lines of Trace over here, the reserve unit that was kept behind, should have been sent in maybe to provide assistance to these Spearmen, but you'll see the Rune Lord now using the Master Rune of Negation, providing damage resistance as we push forward and as these archers continue to fire away, just trying to keep these guys alive. And the Thunderers, meanwhile, again, another volley into the Prince, reducing his health significantly. He is dropping very quickly in health and morale, and he's done very little work. So that is a big problem in my opponent's play here, not being cautious with command, and I'm very familiar with doing that. There have been many times when I've made the same mistake, so that's the big flaw over here, and you'll see the Moondragon as well now frightened away because of these Hammerers, and again, they were under the protection of the Master Rune of Negation momentarily there as the Rune Lord dove into action, so just not an ideal situation for either of these dragons. And meanwhile, over here, you'll see these Silver Helms trying to be useful over here, pushing into these Thunderers, and I pull my Thunderers back, and I send my Slayers in, and they're not going to be braced. They're going to take that hit, of course, and they're going to take it badly. The Thunderers as well get caught in that charge, but the other 2 units of Thunderers are able to turn around and open fire, and the Dragonback Slayers as well are able to dive in, so the Silver Helms are not going to have a good time. Completely intercepted and shut down over there. They start falling apart more or less right away, and at this point I decide the Thunderers have more important things to be involved in, while on the right over here again you'll see these white lines of Trace have completely fallen apart. The Hammerers are a wonderful unit. I love using them, especially as a flanking unit, but you'll see the Mage of High Magic decides to get involved more directly over here, diving in, while again we have some Dragon's Breath coming in, and not a bad use once more, targeting some pretty high value units. I've got these Hammerers over here. These Longbeards with great weapons are a threatening unit, very close to giving up on the fight, and that Dragon's Breath might just push them over the edge there, and these Archers continue to fire away at some of my frontline units over here. They could have done better to fire perhaps at some of these Hammerers, or focus on these Longbeards over here and do that morale damage that might scare them off the field. Same goes for the Eagleclaw Bolt Thrower. So target selection is a big problem over here, and you'll see the Thunderers now peeling away from this situation as those Silver Helms fall apart, while another Dragon's Breath comes in, this time from the Prince, focusing in on the Hammerers, and look at how much hurt that does. Great use of Dragon's Breath here, and in comes the Moondragon as well, terrifying my Dwarf Warriors up front here and doing a great deal of damage to those Hammerers as well. But I respond, of course, the Thunderers open fire, and the Moondragon starts to fall apart. The Prince, in some confidence, decides to peel forward and maybe provide a distraction, so my Thunderers willingly take that distraction, open fire at the Prince and his Sun Dragon, and down goes the Prince. Death to the High Elves. My Dwarf Warriors up front creeping forward now, able to engage these Archers, using the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin as well to slow them down so I can catch them, and of course to reduce their health as well. A lot of damage being caused there. The Mage of High Magic as well, now the focus of my fire, as there's very little left from the High Elves. They surrender, they leave the field broken. Another grudge today has been settled. A Pyrrhic victory. The use of Dragon's Breath, in my opinion, was very impressive throughout this battle. There was only one poor use early on, really, on my artillery. Now, they were used constantly and depleted some of my most capable units, but without the ability to remove the Thunderers from the field, I had battlefield dominance. There was nowhere the Dragons could go where they were close to my important units and far enough away from my Thunderers that they wouldn't get shot. I wasn't too concerned by the High Elf Archers, as the Goblobber was firing away at them, and they did decent work here and there, but the Dragons and the Prince were the key targets. If my opponent had dedicated some more resources to surrounding me and removing the Thunderers from play, he would have stood a higher chance of survival, as Slayers and Thunderers both would have been occupied, allowing the Dragons to rule the skies and the field. Unfortunately for them, I was able to take them apart piecemeal. As always, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War content. Online battles and Total Breakdown bring you a constant flow of tactical analysis. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to meeting you on the battlefield.